How's it going, Grade A Nation? Chris Thomas here. Hope you're having a grade A kind of day. And on this installment of Grade A Nation, I have the pleasure of speaking with Debby Montgomery Johnson. She is an author, public speaker, entrepreneur, and podcast host. The name of her podcast is Stand Up and Speak Up. You can learn more about her at thewomanbehindthesmile.com. Now, The Woman Behind the Smile is also the name of her book, The Woman Behind the Smile, Triumph Over the Ultimate Online Dating Betrayal. And it's available on Amazon fairly affordably, $14.97. It's also available in audiobook form and on Kindle. Now, in the book, she shares her experience with romance gone wrong, leading to not just psychological challenges, but financial challenges as well. So we're fortunate enough to be chatting with her. Debby, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me, Chris.
Well, I appreciate it because I think your story is a very powerful and meaningful one. Now, what was your experience with online dating like that led to the incident?
Well, it's not something that I'd ever anticipated. I'd been married for almost 27 years, and my husband passed away suddenly. He actually walked out the door one day, and the next day I got a call from my oldest son, and he basically said, "Mom, Dad just died." And when I heard that, my husband was only 55. I was 52 at the time, and it completely changed my life. So I was not looking for online dating. Actually, the opposite. I was after 6 months. 6 months after Lou passed away, I was running his company. I was working my own job. I was a very busy person. I was up, 20 hours a day, getting 4 hours of sleep, only because I had to get a little bit of sleep. But it was a very tough time for me because I was alone. My kids. I have four children. They were all out of the house except for the youngest, and he was a busy kid. But I just all I did was work. I worked, and I kept things together, pretending to have my life in control. And my girlfriend said to me, "Hey, you need to get a life," which they meant you needed to do something other than work. And I went to the online dating platform because I felt like it was safe. Everybody I had talked to about it had met really nice people. They'd met their significant others, their husbands, their wives. And so I decided that was a safe place for me to go because I could do it from my home. I could do it on my time. And I also felt like there was a little bit of safety in not having to see someone right away because again, I'd been married for so long. I wasn't ready for a physical relationship. I was really ready for a companion, someone that I could talk to. And so I jumped into a faith-based site, again, thinking that was going to be safe. And I was very surprised. I don't know if your audience does online dating, but back then, this was 11 years ago. I how did I put it out there? I was 50, 52. I was looking for someone between 55 and 62, and I was totally amazed at the pictures that came back of the guys in what I call the wife beater t-shirts. And they just my husband was a brilliant guy and very put together, and when I saw this I'm thinking, this is not what I want. And I always laugh too with my friends that they couldn't write any better than a fifth grader, which is kind of judgmental on my part. But I was looking for someone that was accomplished and a business person. And it wasn't until I was contacted by a very good looking man, lost his wife, and he was from England, from London. He was an international contractor, and he wrote well. He was just well educated. And I'm thinking, this is fun. I could do this. And I dipped my toe, but then I jumped in and fell for him in a really hard way, rather quickly, actually.
Now, how did that manifest in terms of what was it that he was doing that led you to fall for him pr- pretty deeply fairly quickly?
Well, he was supposedly in Houston. When we first met, he was in Houston. He was on a job, and he had just gotten a contract with his company to go over to overseas. This was the interesting part. He was an international contractor for a hardwood tree company. I can't remember the name of it. It doesn't really matter. But he didn't know that I had investments in hardwood trees in Costa Rica, something that my late husband had gotten into. And so when I started looking into his company, his business, I felt like, well, I can kind of understand what he's doing here. And again, I own a company, and so our business things would be aligned. And when he traveled, I've done traveling. I've traveled around the not around the world, but I've traveled many places in the world. And so it was a fun adventure to me. And he moved us off. This was interesting though. He moved us off of the dating site relatively quickly. I was pretty novice in this dating world, so I didn't know that that's something that wasn't really the right thing to do. He moved me onto Yahoo Chat. Again, I'd never heard of Yahoo Chat, but it was fun. It was like I was instant messaging him when he would come on. We would be on for hours, and I type really quickly. So it would be like I was having a conversation with him, but I was writing it. And that was actually quite safe for me because I found it easier to explain who I was, to talk about my day through writing rather than through speaking. And again, it was amazing. And I kept track of all those chats we had. I had an online journal at the time, and I copied and pasted everything into my journal, thinking that I was creating a family history for my kids. And it turned out to be, I've got 4,000 pages of journal from those 2 years experience. It was amazing.
So in those online chats, you were not speaking and not seeing him in any way.
Not, no, that is true. But through writing, I felt like I got to know him. He was very open, and we talked about our stories, we talked about our families, we talked about everything. We sent pictures back and forth. We would send music to each other. It was just that we weren't ever in person, and we were supposed to have gotten together. He This started in November. He was going to be done with part of the job by Christmas. He was supposed to come here. I had made hotel reservations for his son and his sister and for him, and everything was going along until it didn't. And then something would happen. And part of me understood with having a company, you understand that things do happen, and it's not always in our control, and finances aren't always in our control. We have to wait until the job is over with to get paid. So there were some things that I really understood. There were some things I didn't understand, like the tariffs that he was incurring over the international tariffs, the international customs issues. Those things I had a little bit of experience with, but not a lot. So I just trusted him. There was no reason for me not to trust what he was telling me. And so I learned a lot, and I Googled a lot. I got to know his attorney. Uh, it was someone that I didn't meet in person, but again, there was one night I had Yahoo Chat open with three different parties. I had his attorney on, I had his sister and his son on, and I had him on. And you can imagine three open chat boxes. I was going back and forth through all of them. And I was interesting. I was using my conversation with his sister Mary to learn about her, but I also asked questions about him. And then I would ask him about her and vice versa. So I was trying to get an idea of who this family was through writing. And it was extraordinary, actually. And I felt like I knew everybody, and everybody had a voice to me. Even when I was talking with his son, who was young, when I heard him, well, when I was reading his writing, I could actually hear this young child, and he's running around the house and making pizza with his aunt, and it was truly amazing how that story came to be. And after 2 years, I felt like I knew everybody in the story. I felt every time something happened, the emotions of it would be like my own family was having a problem. Someone was in the hospital, or somebody got hurt, or something happened. And it was very, very personal at that point. And it happens really quickly. It's interesting that you'll get drawn into their life very quickly, as I'm sure he got drawn into mine, because I felt like I was talking to some man that I was going to build a life with. And I was very open about who I was, and open about my husband dying and the way I felt. And so he got to know me really personally through that whole experience.
And there was nothing that led you to question the authenticity of the other people that were taking part in the chats, because when someone hears that every member of the family, the sister, the son, their person's lawyer is engaging in Yahoo Chat, it sounds like a situation where, you know, is everything on the up and up? Because the level of adoption of this one tool to communicate across an entire family and the person's inner circle, it seems somewhat strange, and that raises an alarm bell. In
Uh,
retrospect, does it? In retrospect, do you think that you should have had a little bit more skepticism about some of these conversations, or do you think everything was indeed on the up and up, and these were real people that you were talking with?
Oh, well, I obviously I know 2020 hindsight. I know a lot about what's happening now. Back then, I had no reason to not believe it was multiple people and that they were family. Again, I had only heard really good things about people's experiences with online relationships. And yeah, there were pink flags that I call them. There were what most some people might have called red flags, but the psychology of that scam was so, I don't want to say manipulative, but that is the word. It was very manipulative. I didn't know it at the time. And I just felt like, this was a really terrific guy, and he was drawing me into his family. And I understood that, he was in Malaysia, he was in Hong Kong, he was in those places. I had never traveled there. So when he said he had had interspersed, internet service, you and I were just talking about that, how sometimes we can't even do our own shows because the internet goes in and out. We did have internet issues back and forth. I just attributed it to where he was. And his sister's experience in being in London, she was a widow. She was by herself with little Kenny, and they didn't. What they told me is that their computer wasn't that good. Well, that's not out of the realm of possibility. And so I believed it. And I had no reason not to believe it at the time. So it was a perfect storm for me. Again, I wasn't desperate to find somebody. I enjoyed the conversations we had. I enjoyed the banter back and forth, and we spent a lot of time on the computer in the middle of the night too. It'd be like 2 o'clock in the morning, and I would hear that ding, ding, ding of the Yahoo chat go off. And I say now that it's like Pavlov's dogs. You hear that sound, and boy, you just jump out of bed because it's the endorphins, it's the excitement, it's the knowing that someone is on the other end of the line that really wants to talk with you. And we had some very engaging conversations over the years. And the thing that was tough, and this is what your audience wants to really know, is like, how in the world did she get sucked in? Well, I didn't get sucked in. It happened little by little over time. And that's how these things happen. And we all know that it's an online scam now, but they will draw you in a little at a time. They'll ask you to do something, one little thing, to see if you'll do it. It's kind of like when you have bank fraud, they'll take out, 75 cents and see if you notice it. And in my particular case, the way I got drawn into this thing financially was at the very beginning. Within a few weeks, he said, "Hey, Deb, I've got this friend who's an engineer, and I don't remember where he was, but he's having trouble getting onto the website, onto the dating site. Could you send a check in to the company?" And again, because of my experience at the beginning, thinking, well, there aren't a whole lot of guys over 55 that are worth talking to, I sent the check in, and it was a validation for me that this is a real person. I sent it into the real website, and now looking back, I know that just created some authenticity for another scammer online, because now they're a paid subscriber. I didn't know that at the time, obviously. So that drew me in. Well, that made them understand that, well, she might be willing to help us out. And so the next ask was a little bit bigger, but it was always a business thing at the beginning. And again, because we had companies and we talked about our companies and what was going on, I felt like, well, I can help him out here. He's going to pay me back in the end. Again, never thinking in my mind that this was a scam. I just wasn't. I was very trusting, and I believed the stories that he was telling me for the most part. There were some times, and here's where my background came in. I was an Air Force intelligence officer, imagery analyst. I was a banker, former banker, branch manager, senior branch manager at a big bank, and I'd had some legal training. So in all the times that I had those questions, those pink flags that were coming up, I would do my research. I would look at pictures he sent to me. I would look at addresses that he sent to me to try to figure out, is this a real place? Could a real family live there? I even wrote to an association in England asking about his attorney. I sent them his name and where his address and all these things. And they did write back to me and said, well, Miss Montgomery, we can't seem to find Peter or whatever his last name was. And at that point, I rationalized about, well, if he's an international lawyer, then maybe he's not registered with them. Again, why I would think that way, I don't know, but I didn't have any reason to not trust what the guys were telling me. I know a lot better now.
Now, in terms of the scams, it sounds like it was piece by piece, checking to see if you would comply with each request. What was the final request, and what did it ultimately lead to?
Well, again, it was over 2 years, and the goal was for him to finish up this large job of moving trees, hardwood trees, from Malaysia over to India. I'd even flown to Houston to get a visa to go to India because I was going to meet him in India to set up some banking things, that was the craziest thing. I flew overnight to Houston from South Florida and literally walked into the visa office, got a visa, stamp in my passport, came back home, and I was telling my dad what I was doing, and he's like, "Are you sure?" He goes, "I think it's a little bit scary for you to do that." And then I made contacts over there with people outside, people from church, people from wherever that I would feel safe flying over to stay with. And at the very end, right before I never did make airline reservations there, but Eric came on and he said, "I don't think it's good for you to come here right now." I'm like, okay. So I do have that stamp in my passport. But what happened at the end, to kind of fast forward through this whole thing, is I sent him a lot of money to help with the company. And there was one time at the very beginning, I've got to put this out there. I'm from Vermont originally, and I always classified myself as one of those damn Yankees that didn't give money away to anybody except for family. And we had a first little tiff over the first amount of money, which was being sent through Western Union. Again, as a banker, I'm thinking, oh, Western Union, that's a little scuzzy. But he was explaining to me that that was the only way for me to get him this money in Malaysia. So I capitulated and I went and I was like, well, why am I not putting your name down on this receipt? And he said, because it's my friend that lives here and he's got the contacts at Western Union. So again, looking back, absolutely red flag. Would I do it ever again? Absolutely not. But I was so enamored by him and the story that I wanted to help him. And I knew as soon as I got the money over there that it would help to get him home. And as soon as he got home, then we were going to get together and then we would start this great romance. In the end, he came online through Yahoo Chat, and it was early in the morning on September 10th, 2012. And he starts off the conversation with, "Deb, how do you feel about forgiveness?" Well, over the 2 years, we'd had many spiritual discussions, experiences. And so I went in on how I felt and I put my scriptural hat on. And honestly, for hours, we went back and forth about this. And then we got disconnected. Not unusual. He comes back on and he says, "Hey, can we revisit what we were talking about earlier?" And so we did a little bit. And I said, "Hey, is there something that's gone wrong?" I said, why are you talking about forgiveness? Have I done something wrong?" And he said, "No." He said, "I have something to tell you, and I just need to make sure that you can forgive me because this is going to hurt you." Well, at that point, I'm thinking, "Oh, you don't need to be hurting me. What's wrong?" And he said, "I have a confession to make." And at that, I just had this gut feeling that this was not going to go well because I'd heard that once in my marriage and it was not a happy thing. And so I'm thinking, okay, Eric, you're sick. There's something wrong. And he goes, "No, I have this confession." He goes, "I'm confessing that this has all been a scam." That's the first time I'd ever heard of scamming like that. And I was like, oh my gosh, something is wrong. I said, "Now you're lying to me. You have to prove to me that this is a scam." And he actually was able to walk me through getting a camera to come up on Yahoo Chat. For 2 years, I'd asked him to either Skype or to Yahoo, do something. And he goes, "I'm going to show you that there's a camera on Yahoo Chat." And so I'm sitting there looking, I've got dual screens in my office, and I've got this handsome Brit on my screen. And on this little camera in the bottom right hand corner of my screen pops up this Yahoo camera chat. And I'm looking at this dark haired, dark eyed, dark skinned young guy with a big smile on his face. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, what has happened here? And that's him. That was him. That was the real guy. He came online and he confessed to me in person online. And I got a picture of him. I had my cell phone right beside me and I took a picture, and it's the only picture I have of the real guy. And his name was not Eric Cole. His name was Joseph. I don't know his last name, but Joseph was a young Nigerian. Joseph was not a British businessman. He had a British accent when I talked to him just a few times over the phone, and I heard that accent, which again led into the story, gave credence to the story. And I'm looking at this young man and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, okay, that's when my intelligence banking hat popped back in and my heart was completely separated from my brain, which was a good thing because my story now was in behind me. And I'm looking at him thinking, how am I going to get him? How am I going to get my money back? What am I going to do? And I watched a lot of FBI shows. I'm thinking, okay, tomorrow I'm going to the FBI. We're going to get this taken care of. And I kept him engaged for a while because I didn't want him to know I was going to do that. And he asked, he said, Deb, I know you could turn me in. He goes, I just hope you don't, because I am part of the story, he said was real, was that he was taking care of some of his siblings. And I don't know if that's the truth or not, but I did tell him, I said, look, I'm a very kind person. And if you had just asked me at the very beginning and had been honest with me at the very beginning, I might have helped you, not to the tune of over $1 million, but I would have helped out. And so now I was a little upset that I had been taken. I felt vulnerable. I felt mad. I felt all those feelings of grief that I went through when my husband died. But this time it was anger at myself because I'd been duped. And I've learned a lot since then. But the next day I did call my parents because my parents have always been beside me on this. And I had actually gotten them involved. I'd asked them for some money and they gave it to me. And I didn't care about the money I lost at that point. I cared about the money that my parents lost. And I thought, I'm going to get it back someday. I'm going to try to make them whole. And I have, as a positive note, I was able to purchase a home for them this past year. But back then, mom and dad and I walked into the office of the FBI here in Palm Beach County. And I took my 4,000 pages of journal, my 3-ring binder full of financials, and I told them what had happened. And they looked at me and they're like, we're so sorry. And as a side note, there are more men in Palm Beach that get taken for over $1 million than women, and they'll never tell you that. They said, unless you can get him here to the United States, there's nothing we can do for you. And at that, that's where the woman behind the smile came from. I just put up that mask and put on my big girl pants and said, okay, no one's ever going to know about this. I'm going to hide. I'm going to try to recover somehow. I still have my company. I still have my home. Fortunately, I didn't lose that. But this was such an embarrassment to me that I will never tell anybody about it again. Well, I am talking about it, obviously. And the way that happened is a few years later, I was at a business meeting. And one of the girls at lunch said, Deb, she said something about online dating. And I guess I rolled my eyes at her and she said, what's that all about? And I told her the story and she said, oh my gosh, you have to tell. And I was like, absolutely not. I will not tell anybody. She goes, you have to tell because my mom lost $80,000 and she doesn't know who to talk to. And then someone else came in and said they'd been in a Ponzi scheme, not once, but twice. And then another one came up and said that, she had been living with a guy for a year and then found out he had another family. I had all these women coming and telling me these stories of what had happened to them. And then it became bigger than me. It wasn't about me anymore. And over that weekend, I crafted the story and I invited everybody to the world premiere of The Woman Behind the Smile. And you could have heard a pin drop in that room. And they said, when's the movie coming out? I said, I just made that up. They said, no, you've got to get this story out. And that's why the book came out within the next 6 months. And that's why I've started speaking up, because I realized that I was never going to get my money back. And it didn't matter at that point. What mattered to me was that nobody else was going to get hurt. That if I could open up and become the voice of the survivor or the thriver or whatever, anything but a victim, then that pain that I got from this was going to become my purpose and my mission. And now it's my life. I still have the company, but my passion and my joy and my heartache comes from helping women and some men try to get through this. And it's better to prevent it than to help them recover when they're broken. But the word's not getting out because the victims don't want to speak up. And so I try to show them that there's hope and that there's a reason for this happening and there's a reason for them to speak up.
And I'm very happy that you are helping people with your story. Now, the thing that puzzles me a little bit, because oftentimes when I do hear of these stories, the victim is ghosted. Essentially, they never even hear from the person again. In retrospect, what do you think was the rationale behind taking the mask off and revealing that it was a scam directly to you, and not just stopping all conversation altogether? Why do you think this person that posed as a, a British entrepreneur this chose to go down the road of telling you he did it? What was it about the dynamic of your interaction?
Well, I actually asked him that. I came out and asked him, why did you confess? Because most scammers never confess, and they don't do it in such. It was kind of a kind way to do it, if you can say that. I was really grateful that he did. Let's put it this way: if he had just ghosted me and just left, I would have felt so much worse than when Lou died. Again, because I had contributed to this. So if I can be grateful for one thing, it's that he confessed and that I saw him and that I know what he looks like. So in my mind, that was a brick wall for me. I ran smack into it, and that was my wake up call, which I'm grateful for because most of the women, and I speak women because most of the folks I deal with are women that have been in this situation. They don't have closure. It's like when Lou died and he left. He left one day, he died the next. I never saw him again. It took me a long time to really truly understand and believe that he was gone and that he just wasn't traveling and forgot to call me. The women that do not get closure just are always hoping that something's, he's going to come back. Well, when I asked Eric Joseph why he confessed, he said that it was because he had developed real feelings for me, and that could be part of the story. But I'm just hoping that I'm giving him a little bit of benefit of the doubt that my spirit, my story, my family, my love for him or love for the story affected him in a positive way, at least for a few minutes. That there was a connection between us more than, because afterwards he said, can we keep this going? And I'm looking at him going, are you out of your freaking mind? I said, no, you took $1 million from me. And he said, well, is it because I'm young and black? And I'm thinking, no, you lied to me for 2 years. And I'm grateful that you're now telling me the truth, but you lied to me and you took advantage of me for 2 years. And what I realized, what I know now, is it probably wasn't just him. These guys work in groups and gangs, and it's like they're telemarketers. They are expert at what they do, at the grooming phase, at the relationship phase, at the get the money phase. It is big business. And this is when I'm going to go into my board of directors scars hat. I work for the organization called the Society of Citizens Against Relationship Scams. It's an international nonprofit based in Miami. I'm on the board of directors. We know that these guys work in big groups. It is like cartels. They are huge. They're around the world. It is the World Wide Web. That's why money gets sent to Malaysia, to England, to Nigeria, to wherever. Now, I never sent money to Nigeria. If I had heard Nigeria, I would have stopped in a heartbeat. But I was working with London, with India, with Malaysia, with places that I gave some credibility to. Scammers will take, they don't need $1 million. They need small amounts of money from a large number of people. And when they get someone like me, and there are many like me, then it's a bonus. But it's a tough thing when the women I'm working with have lost their money, have lost all their resources. Many have lost their homes. Many have lost their family members and friends, because then it turns into blame the victim, not, oh my gosh, you've been scammed, you've been taken advantage of. Now it's, why did you do that? Boy, that was really stupid of you. And no victim needs to hear someone say that to them. They are saying it to themselves. The hardest thing to do is to forgive yourself for what you've done. But I need everybody to know the only thing that we did wrong was accept an invitation to talk with a stranger. Because once you open the door to them, they know how to get you. Doesn't matter who. Everybody's going to be scammed by somebody at some point in your life. And I've heard the statistic that 60% of scam happens to you from members of your own family. So this is not people are listening are thinking, well, this could never happen to me. I hope to goodness it never does happen to you. It could happen to your sister. It could happen to your mother. It could happen to your best friend. It's happening to everybody every day, every minute of the day. And it's just destroying people, their confidence, their finances, their futures. It's amazing. And the pandemic has not slowed the scammers down. If anything, this has just escalated over the last 2 years, because people are online looking for friends, looking for connections, not necessarily on online dating sites. For the most part, people are on any social media platform, any gaming site. Words with Friends is a huge one right now. Anybody that's on a Google app or on the chatting sites. I could go on and on about that, because I was talking to this group this morning about, where did you meet your scammer? And they were not on romance sites, although there was one on Facebook Dating, the new Facebook dating site. It's mostly Facebook Friends or LinkedIn, or I had one gal in Vietnam that was helping a guy out. She was on a translation site. He was presumably coming to Vietnam to do some business, and he needed some banking language. So she helped him out there, and they developed a friendship. And then all of a sudden something happened, and he needed her help. And she was actually put out of her family for a while as a young mother. And that was an honor thing with the family, that she'd given some money to this man. And now it was like she stole from her family. So it's devastating to people. And the reason it's happening is because people aren't speaking up and letting others know about it in a big enough way. And social media doesn't care, because not one of their parents have been taken yet. So there's my soapbox.
But it's a very important thing to express. And within your story and in the story of so many others, a common word used or pair of words is shame or ashamed.
Mhm.
Why might shame be such a common feeling in your view in these online scams that take place, given that the person that experienced the scam did absolutely nothing wrong?
Well, we tend to blame ourselves because we're educated, and we're heart centered, and we want to be kind. And when we are taken advantage of that, who do I blame? I can blame him, but it's not going to do me any good. So I'm the closest one here to me. And so it's one of those things where I feel terrible. And then when I do tell somebody, I've got, when my older boys heard about this. Now, again, here's what the scammers do. In the process of the grooming, they will try to isolate you from family and friends. And they will isolate you from those people that are saying, hey, you need to be careful. This doesn't sound right. Because I have friends who basically said, we had to stop talking to you about that because we were afraid we were going to lose your friendship. My boys, they would say, Mom, don't. Again, I was 52, 53, and I'm thinking, leave me alone. I'm the adult here. And when I had to tell them after the fact, they became unglued. And my sons are very successful men. And I realized at that point, they felt that I hadn't trusted them. And I hadn't. I hadn't trusted them because I wanted to be the adult. I wanted to be in charge. I was a smart banker. I was a smart intel officer. And I didn't need anybody telling me what to do. Okay. After the fact, when I realized that I had not allowed my sons to help me, to take care of me. And I think my oldest particularly felt the worst, because when his father died, he took on the mantle of being the man in the house. And I basically pushed him away. I pushed him out of that situation. And to go back after the fact and explain to him what had happened and say, okay, so I'm not coming to live with you and I'm okay. But a lot of people are in that position where they have to rely on somebody now. They've lost their entire retirement accounts. They've lost their home. They've taken a loan against their home. They are down and out. And that's the worst part of this is that the older women that I am working with, they're depressed, they're alone. It leads to suicide, which is horrendous. And without us talking about it and not making them feel bad, uh, it's tough. It's a tough situation to be into, and it's got to be addressed. And the mental health part of it has to be addressed. The therapy has to be addressed. People have to stop being embarrassed about what happened and just say, "Hey, I was taken here in a crazy way." But right now, the biggest scams now are not they're relationship scams, but they're not online love scams. They're financial scams where people are being drawn in by friends and then all of a sudden, hey, I've got this great investment. I want to tell you about it. And then they get you into these investments, which look fantastic. The websites are good. The landing pages are good. You'll send money. They'll send you money back. You'll send more money. And then boom, they ghost you. And I've had some very financially savvy people get taken by these financial scams. And some of them are in the business and they can't talk because they're afraid of losing their licenses. It is a huge thing. It's not somebody sitting in the middle of nowhere, getting taken. These are financially well off, very well educated people that are being taken because the scammers are one step ahead of us and they are trained in universities in Nigeria and in other countries and they are just slick. So our victims can't blame themselves because we're up against a phenomenon that is just one step ahead of us.
Well, that certainly would make for an interesting degree program is online scamming,
Absolutely. Oh,
if it's offered
absolutely.
by your university.
Absolutely. And the thing is, the economy over there is horrendous, but you find something that you're good at. And if you think about it, we've outsourced all of our call centers to India, to Malaysia, to Nigeria, even. And those folks were trained in the art of sales. So, guess what online scams are? It's a sales process and it's a numbers game. You don't, like I said, you don't need everybody to give you $1 million. You need a lot of people to give you $250. And it's happening around the world and it's really unfortunate.
And the book, The Woman Behind the Smile, was published in 2016. And as you mentioned earlier, the events of this were in 2010, I believe, 11 years ago.
Yeah, my husband passed away in 2010 and the scam was revealed in 2012.
Okay. So over the process of the 2 years, yes. What changes in technology since what happened to you have worried you or concerned you that what took place can happen to others? And I kind of want to get your thoughts in part because of the rise in cryptocurrency
Mm-hmm.
and people sending online online money to others, and it is just an address. They really don't know who is the recipient behind the address. It's a lot like a digital Western Union of sorts. It can be a little sketchy if you don't do your due diligence. So, what since what happened in 2012, technology wise, concerns you that this is happening just as much as ever?
Well, I'm concerned with a lot of things, and the cryptocurrency. There are two dynamics in groups that are being scammed. It's the 50 and older, and it's the 13 to 18. Those were the two groups of women that were being taken the most. The older ones because they've got the money and they've either lost a husband through a death or a divorce, and they've got the resources and they're a little bit savvy online, but are very trusting. The young girls are the ones that are putting their pictures out there trying to look for friends, and they have access to their parents' credit cards, and that's very dangerous because that can lead to trafficking and that kind of stuff. The middle area, and this is the interesting part with technology the way it is, the millennials are thinking, well, we're tech savvy and we're doing all these things. Well, it's the millennials that are getting taken with the Bitcoin and with the financial scams because they, again, we're so trusting of the computer. We're trusting of that picture we're looking at. And as far as the online, the dating stuff and the relationship things, the pictures you're looking at, you have to realize there's two victims in this situation. You have me, the one that's, being groomed and taken care or taken care of or taken advantage of, and then the person whose picture I've been falling in love with. That person's picture that's identity fraud. Okay, there's a man or a woman on the other side of that picture that is again a victim themselves. And I actually was on an interview with a fellow yesterday. His name is Kevin Snook. Kevin is from England, well-known personality over there. He's living over in the Far East right now. His picture is being used by 3,000 scammers, profiles, 3,000 scammer profiles. I interviewed an Army colonel, retired Army colonel. Again, his picture has been used by thousands of scammers. These guys' lives have been changed because if you think about it, the women who've fallen in love with that picture, when they find out it's a scam, now they're going after that guy. They'll call him up and say, "Hey, you've been talking to me for a couple of weeks, and you're scamming me." And he's like, "It's not me." Well, many of them don't believe it, and they just harass that man or that woman. That becomes stalking. That's a crime, that the victim has now been pulled into. So there's so many different things. But as far as the technology, you've got the phones. I mean, back in the day, I never text. I didn't have a text. I didn't communicate that way. I didn't even talk to him on the phone, really. The women that I deal with today that have been scammed recently, a lot of it is texting. A lot of it is moving onto WhatsApp, onto Google Chats, uh, those kinds of things. But the Bitcoin, yeah, I mean, I thought Western Union was a little fuzzy. I've got a nephew who's in his 20s. He's like, "Aunt Deb, you've got to get involved in Bitcoin. You got to do this. You got to do that." And I said, "I'm not." I talked to my financial planner, and she said, "Well, if you want to save money for your great grandchildren, might be something to look into." But there's something about that Bitcoin that I just don't trust. You can't get it back. You can't. I mean, again, I don't know enough about it, but from what I have heard, it's a really fast way to send money. But where's the accountability? I don't know. So I would be really suspect. The financial scams I've heard from about recently have all involved Bitcoin, and just the thought of that just has me creeped out.
And an interesting wrinkle in all this is that now, through artificial intelligence, you can generate a realistic photo of someone, and you don't have to catfish. You don't have to take someone's actual photos and say they're someone else. You can manufacture a person to a very precise level of detail, and it it's really intriguing how technology can be used for nefarious purposes.
Absolutely, and that's why I used to say, I wouldn't. If you haven't seen the whites of their eyes within 2 weeks, it's a scammer. But they're very good at videos and video chatting and that kind of stuff. And if you think about it, and I was having this discussion with my husband, I've actually remarried, which is wonderful. And this past year, we spent a lot of time watching Netflix. A lot of our shows were made over in Europe. And if you really look at it, the shows are being done in Spanish and German and Finnish or whatever, but we're hearing the English. By hearing the English, I'm looking at their faces and I'm dead sure that they're speaking English to me, even though I know they're not. Their lips are doing Spanish, but my ears are hearing English. That happens. It's like confirmational bias. You're looking at them and you know what they're saying to you. You're hearing what they're saying to you, and you're believing that their lips are actually saying it, which they're not. So I wouldn't trust anybody unless I had them, had my hand holding their hand. And even then, you got to be careful because there are a lot of con men out there too.
In our discussion, you had mentioned pink flags, and I was gonna seek some tips from you about alarm bells others can look out for. What is the distinction between a pink flag and a red flag?
Well, a red flag is 2020 looking backwards. Right now, a red flag for me, for what I tell folks, is if you're on an online site, or if you're in a in a relationship in a game or something, if someone is moving really quickly and starts trying to, saying things to you that you might feel a little bit uncomfortable with, they're getting a little bit too personal too quickly, that's a red flag. If somebody asks you for money, that is definitely a red flag. If you're on a dating site and they move you to a Yahoo Chats or a Google Hangout, that's a red flag. uh, those are hard red flags for me. You just have to do your due diligence and really look at this person. If somebody tells you that um, they're living somewhere, do a Google search on them. Pretty much everybody, unless you work for one of the ABCs, I call it, which is CIA, FBI, DIA, those companies, those organizations, unless you work for them, there's something about you on the internet. You Google me, I'm everywhere. You Google my dad, you'll find out, where he lives. That kind of stuff. We all have something. So if you're Googling somebody and there's nothing about them, that's a red flag. And if you Google them or do a Google search on the picture, which it used to be a little easier to do that, scammers have figured a way out how that's not happening. But if you do a reverse search on a picture and you find out that it's, the picture belongs to a guy that is a big speaker or something in South Africa, believe that that is a speaker in South Africa and he is not in love with you. He's probably married. So there are some definite red flags. For the men, the pictures being used to scam men are typically actresses, porn stars, musicians, people that might be well known outside of your local area. It's just a matter of doing a little bit of due diligence and really doing some homework. If it's local, I'd get a friend that's, an investigator and do a background check on them. When my brother said that to me, I was like, oh, you guys, this is just dating. If I had tried to do a background check, I would have instantly known there was a problem. So there are some tips. But here are some tips to be careful when you're on your Facebook sites or on your social media. Make sure that your privacy is clamped down. Most of us don't need to have more than 100 friends. You don't need 50,000 followers. We You don't. And it's funny, some of the young kids that I've talked to, they're like, yeah, well, we all have to have more and more and more. And I'm like, no, you don't, because the more you have, the scammers will ingratiate themselves into, for instance, a women's organization. They may pretend to be a woman to try to get in. They may, befriend me, not me. I'm not a good voice, but one of my girlfriends, let's say. And then all of a sudden, I get a friend request, and I see, oh well, that person's a mutual friend of so and so, or a mutual friend of many so and so's. And then my trust kicks in, and I was like, well, if they're friends with him, then I could be a friend with him. And then that lets that person into the group. If the people's privacy settings aren't locked down, if your pictures or your friends lists aren't locked down, then that's how they get the names of folks that they go after. And I was on the call this morning, and I asked one guy, I said, how did you get contacted? She lost a lot of money. She's living in Singapore. She said, I accepted a friend request on Facebook. And I was like, from a stranger? Why would you do that? Again, we're looking for friends, we're looking for fun, we believe who those people are. Don't really look carefully. And here's my pet peeve. I'm former Air Force, my kids are active duty military. Anybody in a military uniform that is trying to tell you that they need money to come home, or that they're in Syria because Afghanistan doesn't work anymore, that's a definite scammer. That's an absolute red flag. No, do not engage. And if you don't stop within the first 2 weeks and you get sucked into the story, it's very, very difficult to get out of it until you're broken. And that's why this is so valuable for you helping me to get this word out, Chris, is that if they hear of the story, it might just stop them for a moment, that they might take a pause and say, okay, let's look into this a little bit further, because once you get that, hey, you're pretty, or I like your smile, or whatever, you get this amygdala hijack, and then your endorphins and all your hormones are kicking in, and then you've lost your brain. And that's a tough place to go, because you're going to get sucked right in.
Now, I know myself and all the listeners will be elated to know that you have remarried. In what ways did the experience of the scam change your perception of men, though, and interactions in the aftermath? How did you ultimately come to a place where you could get in a relationship again and get married?
That was a really good question because I met my husband soon after the scam, and I met him. He was a friend of a friend, and I met him in person. And honestly, the thing that got me over what had happened, or at least was I was able to move forward, is that he was very open and honest and vulnerable about something that happened in his life. And he prefaced it by saying, "My friends told me not to tell you this," and it was nothing terrible, but it was very vulnerable to him. And so then I told him my story, and I said, "If you can live with what I just went through, then this is going to be great." And he was so willing and kind about what had happened. He'd been married for a lot of years, and so had I. So we understood that we do make mistakes, but don't hold it against us. I was willing to open up my heart again, and that's where most women can't. They're so bitter about what happened that they completely shut down, and I don't like to use the word hate, but they hate the idea of men and of dating. And if you're feeling that you're never going to get married, you're never going to meet anybody, you never will. Because love is, you got to, if to open up your heart, you're going to get hurt at some point. But if you, I don't know, I just felt like the man that I met was just so kind to me and so willing. And he understood when I decided to start speaking up, he understood how valuable that was for me in healing and in helping. And he's my biggest supporter. He does not want any of the limelight, does not want to be on any TV show or podcast or anything, but I always give him the credit for being the one that's there to hold my hand when I'm done, because that gives me the security that I really needed. And the one thing that I also got through that was tough, but it was the most important thing, is prior to this scam, I'd been, like I said, I'd been married a long time, and my husband was very bold and very bodacious and big and brilliant. And many times I didn't want any contention, so I just kind of stuffed my feelings. And a girlfriend of mine who was a therapist after the scam said, "Deb, you had a hole in you that was, if you look at let yourself as a piece of Swiss cheese," she said, "you had a big hole in you that felt like you hadn't been listened to." And over those 2 years of that online relationship, all that writing you did, all the things that he wrote back filled up that hole and made me better from the inside out. And so, with taking my time and I don't, I hated to stop trusting people, but I really question things more now, and I ask for help now. I don't. I rely on myself, but not completely. I will toss things to business associates or my husband. When I have a question about something, I am not quite as quick to jump into things as I might have been before. So that's the one thing I learned. But I learned to heal myself from the inside out, to become stronger from the inside out. And once I released my story through the book and got the emotions out of what had happened, then I could use my story for good. And honestly, I can feel it as we've talked in the last hour. I get stronger every time I talk about it, because I am convinced that there's one person out there, and I don't need a million people listening, one person out there that will benefit from what we've just talked about, either themselves or their family members or friends. And that makes this all worth it to me.
And it has been a very intriguing conversation. And I just wanted to hit at it because you had mentioned it. It feels like there's an interesting dichotomy there, in that you had pursued the online dating realm to fill the void of losing your husband. And in the process of the online dating, another void was being filled, in that for many years you were not necessarily being heard in all respects, or felt like you were being heard in all respects. And through the Yahoo chat and writing, you felt like you were being listened to. I think that there are certain individuals who, I don't want to say are vulnerable, but in terms of the grooming aspect, I think for the future, people have to be made aware of what is happening within their life. What are the gaps? What are the voids that potential scammers can exploit? Because it seems like you say, it's a whole network of p- almost professionally trained scammers taking advantage of the voids in people's lives.
That's exactly what they're doing. And everybody is vulnerable at some point. So if you're thinking, no, 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 this is never going to happen to me, it will. And it will at the least expected time. What was absolutely the best thing for me out of this whole thing is that I love writing now. I write for a magazine called Positive Tribe. I have another book coming out. It's called A Gift Called Fearless. I love writing, and it's therapeutic. It's a way to release any anxiety or any thoughts. I mean, I tell everybody that's had this situation. Actually, I interviewed a person last week on my podcast about publishing. It was the guy that published my book. There's so much out there. There's so many reasons out there why we should be writing. It's to leave a legacy or to tell a story or to help somebody out. It's very valuable. And if you've had something emotional happen to you, it's a great way to release the emotions so that they're not overwhelming you, and that your hurt doesn't define who you are, and it just doesn't define where you're going in the future. And that's the important thing is to identify the things that you love and the things that might have some limiting beliefs. Write it all down. Just get it out. Get a journal and just document. Like today we were talking about the triggers that will get you upset about something. And I work with a lot of people, and every now and then I'll like, oh my gosh, why doesn't this person just listen to what I'm saying? And one of the fellows I work with said, Deb, you just got triggered by that person. He said, what triggered you? And I said, well, I've always thought that people, you need to man up. You need to, do the right thing and get on with your life. Well, not everybody can do that. And I think I've gotten my power back by speaking up and by not allowing the scammer to have that hold on me. And when I see that the scammers can keep a hold on somebody because that person is in denial or doesn't want to let go of the love that they felt, I get frustrated with that. And that's when I need to just kind of pause and take a breath and say, okay, that person's not you. They're going to heal at a different pace, but just keep speaking and keep educating. That's what we're trying to do here, is make people aware of what's going on and allowing them. What I say is beware and be aware. So be careful who you're talking to, and be aware that there are a lot of predators out there, and they are very well educated, and they will try to get into your life and into your head and into your heart. And just be careful, because unless you have a lot of extra money, that you want to save for you and your family, they're going to try to get it from you, and they are very clever and can do it in a big way.
Well, Grade A Nation, I hope you enjoyed this wonderful conversation with Debbie Montgomery Johnson. And if anything, getting out of the interview that there's nothing wrong with a healthy bit of skepticism. I hope that that's something that people can apply on a day to day basis, not just in the online dating realm, but in all aspects of life. There's nothing wrong with having a little bit of skepticism about people and your interactions, especially online. Now, Debbie Montgomery Johnson has a podcast, Stand Up and Speak Up. The book is The Woman Behind the Smile. You can go to thewomanbehindthesmile.com to learn more. And as you heard, there's a second book coming out, A Gift Called Fearless. Very exciting. And hopefully, Debbie will come back on to talk about that book.
Thanks, Chris. This has been amazing, and I really appreciate you helping to get the word out.
Well, thank you so much, Debbie, for being upfront and honest. And Great A Nation, again, take Debbie's words to heart. Think about them. Do not be exploited and taken advantage of by people in these situations. Be mindful. I hope you have a great A kind of day and take care.